Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something. Type in the comments right now, "Some souls never forget." It might seem random, but trust me, by the end of this video, those 4 words will hit different. This isn't just another story you stumble across on YouTube. This is something that will challenge everything you think you know about memory, death, and the invisible threads that connect us across time. What you're about to hear actually happened, and it's been verified by historians. Maybe you've ever felt like you were carrying guilt that wasn't really yours. Or maybe you've looked at a child and wondered how they could seem so old, so wise, so haunted by things they've never experienced. Maybe you felt that strange déjà vu, like you've lived through something before. What if I told you that sometimes the most tragic endings are actually the most beautiful beginnings? That death isn't the end of the story, it's just the comma before the next chapter. This story will take you on a journey from a suburban Connecticut kitchen to the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, from a child psychologist's office to an ancient cemetery in Belfast. It's a story about a 3-year-old boy who remembered dying on the Titanic and the incredible healing that followed. And just when you think you understand what's happening, just when you think the most powerful moment has passed, the final revelation will show you that some connections between souls are so strong they can heal wounds that have been bleeding for over a century. If this story moves you, if it makes you question what you thought you knew about life and death, hit that like button and subscribe. This isn't just about watching a video. It's about witnessing something that reminds us we're all connected in ways we can't fully understand. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help you see your own life differently.
A 3-year-old boy began speaking with an Irish accent he'd never heard, describing the screams of drowning passengers and freezing Atlantic waters. He knew things no child should know about a ship that sank over a century ago. When historians verified his impossible memories, they discovered a truth that would shatter everything we believe about life and death. The first time Tommy Chen spoke with an Irish accent, his mother Lisa nearly dropped her coffee mug. She was in the kitchen of their suburban Connecticut home, preparing his breakfast, when her 3-year-old son suddenly looked up from his coloring book with eyes that seemed far too old for his small face. "Mama, the big ship broke in the cold water," Tommy said, his usual American toddler speech replaced by a thick Irish brogue that sent chills down Lisa's spine. "I couldn't get out. The water was so cold and people were screaming." Lisa knelt beside her son, her heart racing. "Tommy, sweetheart, what are you talking about? What ship?" Tommy set down his crayon, a deep sadness washing over his young features. "I was Patrick then. I worked in the belly of the ship, keeping the engines running. But when she hit the ice, oh God, the sound it made." The words came out with an emotional weight that no 3-year-old should possess. Lisa called for her husband Michael, who came running from his home office, still in his pajamas. When they asked Tommy to repeat what he had said, the boy looked confused, as if emerging from a dream. "I don't know, Mama. I was just coloring." But later that afternoon, while playing with his toy boats in the bathtub, Tommy began describing in vivid detail the layout of what he called the engine room. He spoke of steam gauges, coal furnaces, and the deafening roar of massive engines. His tiny hands moved as if adjusting valves and checking pressure readings, movements too precise and purposeful for a child's play. "The water came so fast," Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. "I tried to help the others get out, but the door was so heavy and the water kept rising." Lisa and Michael exchanged worried glances. Their son had never been on a ship, never seen the inside of an engine room, never even watched movies about the Titanic. Yet he spoke with the authority of someone who had lived it, breathed it, died in it. That night, after Tommy had fallen asleep, Lisa found herself researching child psychology, searching for explanations for her son's strange behavior. But deep in her heart, she already knew this wasn't imagination. The pain in Tommy's eyes when he spoke of the cold water was too real, too raw. too filled with the kind of trauma that echoes across time itself. Tomorrow, she would call Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist recommended by their pediatrician. But tonight, Lisa sat by Tommy's bedside, watching her little boy sleep fitfully, occasionally murmuring words in what sounded like Gaelic, a language he'd never been taught. What was happening to her son?
Dr. Sarah Mitchell had seen many unusual cases in her 15 years as a child psychologist, but nothing had prepared her for the phone call from Lisa Chen. A 3-year-old speaking with an Irish accent about drowning on a ship? It sounded like the plot of a supernatural thriller, not a real case study. Yet here she was, sitting in her office across from Tommy Chen, who was quietly drawing with crayons while his parents watched nervously from the corner. The boy seemed perfectly normal until he looked up at her with those impossibly old eyes. "You don't believe them, do you, lady?" Tommy said, his voice carrying that same haunting Irish accent his mother had described. "You think I'm making stories." Dr. Mitchell felt her professional composure waver freely. "I'm here to listen, Tommy. Can you tell me about the ship?" Without hesitation, Tommy pushed aside his drawing paper and began sketching with surprising precision. His small fingers moved across the page, creating detailed blueprints that made Dr. Mitchell's breath catch in her throat. He drew intricate machinery, labeled pipes and gauges, and even included measurements that seemed far beyond a child's comprehension. "This is the main steam line," Tommy explained, pointing to his drawing, "and here's where we shoveled the coal. The furnaces burned so hot you could feel your skin crackling even from 20 feet away. My friend Seamus worked the night shift with me. Good man he was, always sharing his bread." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, studying the sketch. The level of detail was extraordinary. Valve configurations, pressure readings, even what appeared to be safety protocols written in a child's handwriting, but with technical terminology that belonged in an engineering manual. "Tommy," she said gently, "can you tell me the name of this ship?" The boy's expression darkened, and for a moment he looked as if he might cry. She was the Titanic, the unsinkable ship they called her. But she wasn't unsinkable, was she? Nothing is unsinkable when God decides it's your time. Lisa Chen gasped audibly from her chair. Neither she nor Michael had ever mentioned the Titanic to their son. They had been careful to avoid any movies, books, or conversations about the disaster, hoping to understand Tommy's strange behavior without influencing it. "Tell me about Seamus," Dr. Mitchell continued, making notes. "Seamus O'Brien from County Cork had a scar on his left hand from a chain accident in Liverpool. Always talked about his sweetheart back home, Mary Catherine. He was saving money to marry her." Tommy's voice broke slightly. He never got the chance. The water took him too. Dr. Mitchell felt a chill run down her spine. These weren't vague, fantastical stories, typical of children's imagination. These were specific, detailed memories filled with emotional weight and personal connections. The names, the locations, the intimate details, it all felt uncomfortably real. After the session, as the Chen family prepared to leave, Tommy turned back to Dr. Mitchell with those ancient eyes. "You're going to look us up, aren't you? Patrick O'Sullivan and Seamus O'Brien. You're going to see if we were real." Dr. Mitchell nodded, unable to speak. That night, she found herself at her computer, typing names into historical databases, praying she wouldn't find what she feared she would discover. Dr. Mitchell's hands trembled as she stared at her computer screen at 2:47 a.m. The coffee beside her had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't stop searching. What she had discovered defied everything she understood about reality. Patrick O'Sullivan, age 19, engine room worker aboard the RMS Titanic. Listed among the deceased, body never recovered. But it was the second name that made her heart race. Seamus O'Brien, also 19, also from the engine crew, also dead. The historical records confirmed not just their existence, but details that chilled her to the bone. Seamus O'Brien did indeed have a fiancée named Mary Catherine back in County Cork. He had worked in Liverpool before joining the Titanic crew. And according to a newly digitized crew manifest she found buried in maritime archives, he had a documented injury to his left hand from a chain accident. Details that Tommy couldn't possibly know. Details that weren't in any children's books or popular documentaries about the Titanic. The next morning, Dr. Mitchell made a phone call that would change everything. Professor James Crawford was a renowned maritime historian at Columbia University, an expert on the Titanic disaster. His initial response to her call was polite skepticism. "Dr. Mitchell, I appreciate your interest, but cases of children claiming to remember past lives are quite common. Usually they're influenced by media exposure or—" "Professor Crawford," she interrupted. "This child drew detailed blueprints of the engine room layout and knew the shift schedules of workers whose names weren't public knowledge until recently discovered archives." There was a long pause. "I'll be there tomorrow." When Professor Crawford arrived at Dr. Mitchell's office, he brought with him a briefcase full of recently discovered Titanic documents, crew logs, technical manuals, and personal letters that had never been published. His plan was simple: test the boy with information that no one outside of serious historical research could possibly know. Tommy entered the room with his characteristic mixture of childlike curiosity and ancient weariness. He glanced at Professor Crawford with interest. "You study the old ships," Tommy said. Not a question, but a statement. "You know about her, don't you? About what really happened that night?" Professor Crawford opened his briefcase and pulled out a technical schematic of the Titanic's engine room. "Can you show me where you worked, Tommy?" Without hesitation, Tommy pointed to specific areas on the blueprint. "Here, at Boiler Room 6, this is where I monitored the steam pressure. And here," he moved his finger to another section, "this is where the water started coming in. The rivets popped like gunshots." Crawford's face went pale. The child was pointing to areas that matched exactly with recent forensic discoveries about the ship's hull breach, discoveries that had only been published in specialized academic journals within the last 2 years. "Tommy," Crawford said, his voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell me what you remember about the night the ship sank?" Tommy's expression changed, becoming distant and filled with an indescribable sadness. When he spoke, his Irish accent became more pronounced, and his words carried the weight of unspeakable trauma. "The sound of the impact," he said, "it wasn't loud like in the movies. It was more like a deep groan, like the ship herself was crying out in pain." Tommy's small body began to tremble as the memories flooded back. Dr. Mitchell moved closer, ready to intervene if the session became too traumatic, but Tommy continued speaking in that haunting Irish brogue that seemed to belong to another soul entirely. "We felt the ship shudder, and then everything went quiet for a moment, too quiet. The engines had stopped, and in the engine room, when the engines stop, you know something terrible has happened." Professor Crawford leaned forward, captivated despite his scholarly skepticism. "What did you do then, Tommy?" "Patrick," the boy corrected, his 3-year-old voice carrying the authority of a man who had lived through hell. "My name was Patrick then. I ran to check the watertight doors, but some of them weren't closing properly. The water was coming in faster than the pumps could handle it." Tommy stood up from his chair and began pacing the small office, his movements no longer those of a toddler, but of a man reliving his final moments. "I could hear Seamus calling for help from the lower level. The water was already up to his waist, and he was trying to help some of the other lads get out." Suddenly, Tommy stopped and turned toward the window, but his eyes seemed to be seeing something else entirely, something from over a century ago. "I should have saved myself. I should have run for the lifeboats when I had the chance. But I couldn't leave them. I couldn't leave Seamus and the others to drown." Lisa Chen, who had been watching silently from the corner, began to cry.
The anguish in her 3-year-old son's voice was breaking her heart. This wasn't pretend play or imagination. This was the raw, unfiltered trauma of a man who had faced his own death and chosen sacrifice over survival. "Tommy," Dr. Mitchell said gently, "you don't have to continue if this is too difficult." But Tommy shook his head, tears streaming down his small face. "You need to know. Patrick needs you to know. He's been carrying this pain for so long, across so many years. The guilt, the terrible guilt of surviving in spirit while his body failed him." Professor Crawford felt something shift in his understanding of reality. He had spent his career studying the Titanic disaster as historical fact, but sitting here, listening to this child, he was experiencing it as living memory. "Tell us about the guilt, Tommy," Dr. Mitchell encouraged softly. Tommy's voice became barely a whisper. "I had been taking coal, just small pieces, mind you, to sell for extra money. My mother, Mary O'Sullivan, she was so sick back in Belfast, and the doctor bills—" His small shoulders shook with sobs that seemed too deep for his tiny frame. "I thought I was stealing from the ship. I thought God was punishing me for taking what wasn't mine. When the water started rising, when I realized I was going to die, I thought it was because I was a thief. I thought I deserved to drown." The room fell silent except for the sound of Tommy's heartbroken crying. Professor Crawford found himself wiping away tears, while Lisa Chen struggled to comfort a son who was mourning for a life that had ended before she was even born. In that moment, everyone in the room understood they weren't just witnessing an extraordinary case of past life memory. They were watching a soul trying to heal from a century-old wound.
3 days after the devastating session, Tommy's behavior became even more concerning. He refused to take baths, screaming in terror whenever he saw running water. At night, he would wake up gasping, his small hands clawing at his throat as if he were drowning. But it was what happened during breakfast that truly shook the Chen family. Tommy looked up from his cereal, his eyes distant and sad, and began speaking in what sounded like fluent Gaelic. The words flowed from his lips with a musical cadence that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Lisa recorded it on her phone, her hands shaking as she watched her son speak a language he'd never been taught. When Dr. Mitchell played the recording for Professor Crawford, he contacted a colleague who specialized in Irish linguistics. The translation came back within hours, and it left everyone speechless. "He's praying," the linguist had explained. "It's an old Irish prayer for the dead, but he's apologizing to his mother. He's asking for forgiveness for bringing shame to the family name." Dr. Mitchell knew they needed to help Tommy and Patrick find peace. During their next session, she decided to try something unprecedented. She asked Tommy if Patrick remembered his mother, if he could tell them about her. Tommy's face transformed with a mixture of love and overwhelming grief. "She was the most beautiful woman in all of Belfast," he said, his Irish accent thick with emotion. "Mary O'Sullivan, with hair like spun copper and eyes the color of the Irish Sea. She worked her fingers to the bone taking in laundry just to keep food on our table." "Where did she live, Tommy?" Dr. Mitchell asked gently. "Shankill Road, number 47, a tiny house with a green door that she painted herself because she said it reminded her of the countryside where she grew up." Professor Crawford was frantically taking notes. After the session, he made several phone calls to historical societies in Belfast. What he discovered made his hands tremble as he dialed Dr. Mitchell's number. "Sarah, you need to sit down," he said when she answered. "I found records of Mary O'Sullivan. She lived at 47 Shankill Road until her death in 1920. But here's what's truly extraordinary. Her house was demolished in the 1970s. There's no way Tommy could know about the green door or the specific address unless Patrick's memories are real," Dr. Mitchell finished.
But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Crawford had contacted a genealogical researcher in Belfast who specialized in Titanic victims' families. In the old parish records, they found something that changed everything. Sarah. Crawford's voice was barely a whisper over the phone. Mary O'Sullivan's grave. It's in Milltown Cemetery in Belfast. The headstone has an inscription, "Beloved Mother of Patrick, lost at sea on the Titanic. May God forgive his troubled soul and grant him peace." Dr. Mitchell felt the world tilt around her. She knew about his guilt? Even back then she knew he was struggling with something? "There's more," Crawford continued. "According to the church records, Mary spent her final years visiting psychics and mediums, trying to make contact with Patrick's spirit. She died believing her son was trapped somewhere between life and death, unable to find peace because of some unresolved sin." That evening, Dr. Mitchell called the Chin family with a proposal that would either heal Tommy's fractured soul or traumatize him beyond repair. But looking at the pain in that little boy's eyes, she knew they had to try. "We need to take Tommy to Ireland," she told Lisa and Michael. "Patrick needs to say goodbye to his mother properly. He needs to find forgiveness, not just for the coal he took, but for the century of guilt he's been carrying." The decision would change all of their lives forever.
2 weeks later, the Chen family found themselves standing in the misty rain outside Milltown Cemetery in Belfast. Tommy had been unusually quiet during the entire flight from Connecticut, but as they approached the old cemetery gates, something changed in his demeanor. He began walking with purpose, as if his small feet knew exactly where they needed to go. "This way," Tommy said, his Irish accent returning stronger than ever. "She's this way." Dr. Mitchell and Professor Crawford, who had accompanied them on this unprecedented journey, followed closely behind Lisa and Michael as Tommy navigated through rows of weathered headstones with uncanny precision. The cemetery was vast, with thousands of graves dating back centuries, yet Tommy moved through it like he was returning home. He stopped suddenly in front of a modest gray headstone, overgrown with moss and nearly forgotten by time. The inscription was barely visible, worn down by decades of Irish rain and neglect. But Tommy fell to his knees in front of it, his small hands trembling as he traced the faded letters. "Mama," he whispered, and the single word carried such profound love and grief that Lisa Chen began to cry. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left you alone." Professor Crawford knelt down and carefully cleaned away the moss and debris from the headstone. As the inscription became clearer, everyone could read the words that had been carved over a century ago. Mary O'Sullivan, 1852-1920. Beloved Mother of Patrick, lost at sea on the Titanic. May God forgive his troubled soul and grant him peace. Tommy reached into a small backpack and pulled out a bouquet of white lilies that Lisa had helped him pick from their hotel's garden that morning. With reverent care, he placed them against the headstone. "I wasn't a thief, Mama. I was just trying to help you. I was just trying to make sure you had enough money for the medicine. I never wanted to bring shame to our family." The adults watched in stunned silence as Tommy began speaking in Gaelic again, the words flowing from him like a prayer or a confession. Dr. Mitchell didn't need a translation to understand that this was a son finally speaking to his mother, finally releasing the guilt that had imprisoned his soul for over 100 years. Suddenly, something extraordinary happened. Tommy's crying stopped, and his face took on an expression of wonder and peace that none of them had ever seen before. He was looking at something just above the headstone, something that no one else could see. "She forgives me," Tommy whispered, his voice filled with awe. "She says she always knew I was a good boy. She says the coal, it wasn't stealing when it was for love. She says she's been waiting for me to forgive myself."
Tommy stood up and placed his small hand on the headstone one final time. And when he spoke again, it was in his normal 3-year-old American voice, the Irish accent completely gone. "She's beautiful, just like Patrick remembered, and she's not sad anymore." Lisa knelt beside her son and hugged him tightly, feeling something shift in his small body, a release, a letting go of a burden that had never been his to carry. For the first time since this extraordinary journey began, Tommy Chen looked like a normal 3-year-old boy. The ancient sadness had lifted from his eyes, replaced by the natural curiosity and joy of childhood. Patrick O'Sullivan had finally found peace. The flight back to America was remarkably different from their journey to Ireland. Tommy played with his toys, chatted excitedly about the airplane, and seemed like any normal 3-year-old on his first international trip. The tormented soul who had spoken of drowning and guilt appeared to have found peace. But Dr. Mitchell knew their story was far from over. 3 weeks after returning from Belfast, she received a call from Professor Crawford that would add yet another layer to this extraordinary case. "Sarah, you need to see what I've found." Crawford's voice was filled with excitement. "I've been going through more recently discovered Titanic documents, and I found something about Patrick O'Sullivan that changes everything." They met at his Columbia University office, where Crawford had spread across his desk a collection of photocopied documents, survivor testimonies, and ship manifests that had never been made public. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a handwritten letter. "This is from Margaret Hartwell, a first-class passenger who survived the disaster. She wrote this account to her sister just 2 weeks after being rescued." Dr. Mitchell read the faded handwriting aloud. "There was a young Irish boy, couldn't have been more than 19, who helped us reach the upper decks when the water began rising. He kept saying, 'Ladies first, and refused to save himself until everyone else was safe. I never learned his name, but I'll never forget his courage." Crawford turned the page to reveal more testimony. And here's another account from James Murphy, a third-class passenger who survived. He specifically mentions a red-haired Irish lad from the engine room who held open the watertight doors long enough for at least a dozen men to escape before the water overtook him. Dr. Mitchell felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Patrick wasn't just trying to save himself, he was saving others. "There's more," Crawford continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I found the ship's official incident report, filed by the chief engineer who survived. It specifically commends engine worker P. O'Sullivan for extraordinary heroism in the final moments, sacrificing his own chance of survival to assist in passenger evacuation." The truth was overwhelming. Patrick O'Sullivan hadn't died as the guilty thief he believed himself to be. He had died as a hero, a young man who chose others' lives over his own, who held open doors until the freezing Atlantic claimed him. "Patrick never knew," Dr. Mitchell whispered. "He died thinking he was being punished for stealing coal, never knowing that his final act was one of pure heroism." That afternoon, Dr. Mitchell called the Chen family and asked them to bring Tommy in for one more session. When they arrived, she could see that Tommy looked healthier and happier than he had since this whole ordeal began. But she needed to share Patrick's true story with him to complete the healing that had begun in Belfast. "Tommy," she said gently, "I need to tell you something important about Patrick, something he never knew when he was alive." Tommy looked at her with curious eyes, no longer carrying the weight of Patrick's memories, but still connected to that brave young man from long ago. Dr. Mitchell showed him the survivor testimonies and told him about Patrick's heroism, about how many lives he had saved,
about his final moments had been spent not in cowardice or guilt, but in selfless courage. Tommy listened quietly, and when she finished, he smiled the bright, innocent smile of a 3-year-old. "Patrick's not sad anymore," Tommy said simply. "He knows he was brave. He knows his mama was proud of him." And in that moment, Dr. Mitchell realized they had witnessed something far more profound than a case of past life memory. They had watched a soul heal across lifetimes, finding redemption through truth, love, and forgiveness. 2 months had passed since Tommy's return from Ireland, and Dr. Mitchell found herself documenting what might be the most extraordinary case of her career. Tommy Chen was thriving. No more panic attacks, no more Irish accent, no more nightmares about drowning. He was simply a happy, curious 3-year-old who occasionally mentioned his friend Patrick in the past tense, as if speaking about someone he had once known but who had moved far away. But the most remarkable session came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Tommy arrived at Dr. Mitchell's office with an unusual request. "Dr. Sarah," Tommy said, using the nickname he had given her, "Patrick wants to show you something he saw when he was in the light place." Dr. Mitchell felt her pulse quicken. Since the Ireland trip, Tommy rarely spoke about Patrick's memories, and when he did, it was always with a sense of peace rather than trauma. "What did he see in the light place, Tommy?" Tommy climbed onto the comfortable chair and closed his eyes, his small face taking on an expression of serene concentration. When he opened them again, there was something different. Not the tortured soul of Patrick in distress, but a peaceful presence sharing a sacred memory. When Patrick left his body in the cold water, he didn't just disappear. He went to a place where everything was warm and bright, like being inside the sun, but without it hurting your eyes. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, captivated. "What happened there?" "There were people there. People made of light, and they showed Patrick his whole life, not just the bad parts he remembered, but all of it. They showed him every time he helped someone, every time he was kind, every time he chose to do good even when it was hard." Tommy's voice took on an ethereal quality, as if he were translating experiences from a realm beyond human understanding. They showed him the people he saved that night on the ship, a young mother with a baby who lived because Patrick held the door open, an old man who made it to the lifeboats because Patrick helped him up the stairs. 12 people, Dr. Sarah. 12 people lived full lives because Patrick chose to help them instead of saving himself. Tears began streaming down Dr. Mitchell's face as Tommy continued. And then they showed him something even more beautiful. They showed him all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that those 12 people had, hundreds and hundreds of people who existed because Patrick was brave that night. Whole families who got to love each other because a 19-year-old boy from Belfast decided that other people's lives mattered more than his own. Tommy opened his eyes and looked directly at Dr. Mitchell with a wisdom that transcended his young years. Patrick thought he was being punished, but he was really being prepared. The light people told him that souls who sacrifice themselves for others get to come back and help more people. That's why Patrick's memories came to me, so we could help other children who carry old sadness. Dr. Mitchell could barely speak. Other children? Tommy nodded solemnly. There are more, Dr. Sarah. More children with old souls and sad memories. Patrick says his job now is to help them find peace, just like we helped him. In that moment, Dr. Mitchell understood that Tommy's story wasn't ending. It was beginning a new chapter. This little boy who had carried the trauma of a past life and found healing through love and truth was being called to become a healer himself. 6 months after Tommy's revelation about his calling to help other children, Dr. Mitchell's office had become an unexpected sanctuary for families experiencing the impossible. Word had spread quietly through professional networks about the Titanic boy who had found peace,
and parents began reaching out with their own extraordinary cases. There was 7-year-old Emma from Oregon who spoke fluent French and insisted she had died in World War I as a nurse named Marie. 5-year-old Marcus from Texas who drew detailed Civil War battle plans and cried for his brothers in blue who had fallen at Gettysburg. Each child carried memories that didn't belong to them, trauma from lives they had never lived in bodies they had never owned. But Tommy had become something remarkable, a translator between worlds, a bridge between past and present. Now 4 years old and wise beyond his years, he would sit with these troubled children and help them understand what was happening to them. "It's okay," Tommy would tell them gently, his voice carrying a maturity that still astonished Dr. Mitchell. "The sad memories aren't yours to keep forever. They just need to be heard, and then they can go rest." On this particular afternoon, Tommy was working with a 6-year-old girl named Sophie who had been having nightmares about a house fire. She insisted her name was Catherine and that she had died trying to save her younger siblings in 1892. Sophie's parents were at their wits' end, watching their daughter carry guilt for children she had never known in a fire that had happened over a century before her birth. Tommy sat across from Sophie, both children coloring peacefully, while Dr. Mitchell observed. Then Tommy looked up with that familiar expression of ancient knowing. "Catherine," Tommy said softly, addressing the soul within Sophie, "you did save them. The baby and the little boy, they got out because you showed them the window. They grew up and had families and lived happy lives." Sophie stopped coloring and looked at Tommy with tear-filled eyes. "But I couldn't get out. I couldn't follow them." "You weren't supposed to follow them," Tommy replied with gentle certainty. "Your job was to make sure they were safe, and you did your job perfectly. Now it's time to let them take care of themselves, and you can just be Sophie and just be 6 years old." Dr. Mitchell watched in amazement as Sophie's shoulders relaxed, as if a weight she had been carrying had finally been lifted. Within weeks, Sophie's nightmares stopped, and she began playing and laughing like any normal child. This scene repeated itself with child after child. Tommy had somehow become a conduit for healing, able to communicate with these trapped souls and help them find the peace that had eluded them across lifetimes. Professor Crawford, who had continued documenting these cases, was astounded by the patterns they were discovering. He explained to Dr. Mitchell during one of their research meetings, "It's as if certain souls volunteer for this, souls who have experienced trauma or unfinished business, but who have also learned the lessons of sacrifice and love. They choose to return and help others heal." But it was Tommy himself who provided the most profound insight during a quiet moment in Dr. Mitchell's office. "Patrick taught me something important," Tommy said, looking out the window at children playing in the park below. "He taught me that the saddest stories can become the most beautiful ones if you let love be stronger than fear. And when you help someone else stop being sad, you get to feel what angels feel." Dr. Mitchell realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in the field.
April 14th marked the anniversary of the Titanic disaster, and for the first time since Tommy's extraordinary journey began, the date held significance not for pain, but for celebration. Tommy, now 5 years old, had asked his parents for a very special way to honor this day. Standing on the deck of a small boat off the coast of New York with Dr. Mitchell, Professor Crawford, and his parents beside him, Tommy held a wreath of white roses, the same flowers that had adorned his grandmother Mary's grave in Belfast. The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly before them, its surface calm and peaceful under the afternoon sun. "Patrick wants to say goodbye properly," Tommy announced, his voice clear and strong. "He wants to thank the ocean for keeping his story safe until I was ready to hear it." Dr. Mitchell watched as Tommy stepped forward, no longer the traumatized 3-year-old who had first spoken with an Irish accent in her office. This was a child who had integrated an extraordinary experience into wisdom that would guide him for the rest of his life. "Thank you, Patrick," Tommy said, as he placed the wreath gently on the water's surface.
Thank you for trusting me with your memories. Thank you for showing me that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about choosing love, even when you are scared. The wreath floated away slowly, carried by gentle currents toward the spot where, over a century ago, a young Irishman had made the ultimate sacrifice for strangers who became angels in his story. Professor Crawford had tears in his eyes as he watched. In the past 2 years, his research with Tommy had revolutionized his understanding not just of history, but of the very nature of human consciousness. "You've changed how I see everything," he told the boy. "You've shown me that history isn't just facts and dates. It's the continuation of love across time." Tommy smiled up at him. "Patrick says that's the most important thing to remember. The love never ends. It just changes shape." As they headed back to shore, Tommy settled into his mother's arms, looking like any normal 5-year-old tired after a day on the water. But Dr. Mitchell knew better. She had witnessed this child facilitate healing for dozens of other families, had watched him help souls find peace across centuries of pain. Just last week, Tommy had helped a young boy release memories of being a soldier in Vietnam. The week before, he had comforted a girl who remembered dying as a pioneer child crossing the American plains. Each case strengthened Tommy's understanding of his unique gift and his commitment to using it in service of others. "Dr. Sarah," Tommy said sleepily as the boat approached the harbor, "Patrick showed me something else. He showed me that when people die doing something brave and good, they don't really die. They become part of every brave and good thing that happens after." Lisa Chen hugged her son closer, marveling at how this extraordinary journey had not taken her child away from her, but had given her a son with the wisdom of ages and the compassion of saints. Dr. Mitchell looked out at the Atlantic, where Tommy's wreath was now just a speck of white on the vast blue expanse. Somewhere beneath those waters lay the remains of the Titanic and the brave souls who had gone down with her. But their stories, Patrick's story, lived on in the laughter of a 5-year-old boy who had learned that love transcends death, that healing is possible across lifetimes, and that sometimes the most broken souls become the most powerful healers. As the sun set over the ocean, Tommy Chen fell asleep in his mother's arms, dreaming not of drowning or cold water, but of light-filled places where heroes are born and love never dies. Patrick O'Sullivan was finally completely at peace.